The church bells tolled like a death knell. But Ethan wasn't dead not yet. He stood outside the steeple, heart pounding, staring at the crowd spilling from the doors, their faces twisted with grief and judgment. He'd planned his own funeral, and now he was here to take it back. Ethan Clark, 26, had always known he was different. Growing up in the small, conservative town of Willow Creek, Indiana, he'd learned early to hide his truth. His parents, devout and unyielding, saw his love for James as a sin, a stain on their family's legacy. But James was his sunrise, his anchor, his everything. When Ethan's terminal diagnosis came leukemia, aggressive, untreatable, they'd fought for every moment together. Yet, his parents had other plans, a funeral to cleanse his legacy, to bury the truth of who he was. Ethan gripped James's hand, the autumn air sharp against his pale skin. "We're doing this," he whispered, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. James, with his warm brown eyes and tousled blonde hair, nodded, his jaw tight. They'd spent weeks planning this moment, a rebellion against the suffocating expectations of Willow Creek. Ethan wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for his story. The church doors swung open, and the murmurs of the crowd hushed. Ethan stepped forward, his frail frame wrapped in a black coat, leaning slightly on James. Gasps rippled through the mourners, his parents, the pastor, neighbors who'd whispered behind their hands for years. "I'm not dead," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "And this funeral isn't yours to control." His mother, Ellen, clutched her pearls, her face a mask of shock and fury. "Ethan, this is blasphemy," she hissed, stepping forward. His father, Richard, stood rigid, his eyes cold as stone. They'd organized this service to erase James, to present Ethan as the son they wished he'd been straight, obedient, saved. But Ethan had learned of their plans, overheard their hushed conversations about a proper memorial. He wasn't having it. "I'm here to tell my story," Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "Not the one you wrote for me." He turned to James, whose presence was a quiet strength beside him. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others leaning in, drawn to the raw defiance in Ethan's stance. He wasn't just reclaiming his funeral. He was reclaiming his life, however little of it remained. The idea had come to him in the hospital, during one of those endless nights when the machines beeped and James slept in the chair beside his bed. Ethan had always been a planner, a dreamer. He'd proposed to James under the old oak in Willow Park, promising forever even as his body betrayed him. When he heard his parents' plan to sanitize his memory, something snapped. If he was going to die, it would be on his terms. James had been hesitant at first. "This is crazy, Ethan," he'd said, running a hand through his hair. "You're sick. You need rest, not a showdown." But Ethan's fire was contagious. They'd spent nights drafting a speech, choosing music, even picking flowers, white lilies. For truth, Ethan wanted the world to know he loved James, unapologetically, and that no one could erase that. Now, standing before the crowd, Ethan felt the weight of every eye on him. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the effort of standing upright. "This is my funeral," he said, his voice echoing off the church walls. "And it's going to be honest." He began to read, his words a tapestry of love and pain. He spoke of meeting James at college, of their first kiss under a starry sky, of the way James's laughter could pull him from the darkest places. He spoke of his parents' rejection, their insistence that his love was a choice, a mistake. "But love isn't a sin," he said, his eyes locking on his mother's. "It's the only thing that's kept me alive." The crowd was silent, some faces softening, others hardening. Ethan didn't care. This was for him, for James, for every kid in Willow Creek who hid who they were. He glanced at James, who gave him a small, proud smile. They were in this together, no matter what came next. Ellen stepped forward, her voice shaking. "You're embarrassing us. Ethan, stop this." But Ethan didn't flinch. "You don't get to decide who I am anymore," he said. "Not in life, and not in death." The pastor, a stern man named Reverend Holt, cleared his throat. "This is a house of God. Ethan, you're disrespecting his will." Ethan turned to him, unflinching. "If God made me, he made my love too, and I'm not ashamed of it." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mix of shock and reluctant admiration. Ethan felt a surge of strength, his heart pounding with purpose. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every person who'd been told their love was wrong, their identity a flaw. He and James had planned for this moment, but the reality was electric, terrifying, alive. As Ethan finished his speech, he reached for James's hand again. "This is my funeral," he said, his voice softer now, but no less firm. "And it's a celebration of love, not shame." He nodded to James, who stepped forward with a small speaker. The soft strains of their song, Hallelujah, the one they danced to in their tiny apartment, filled the air. The crowd watched, some crying, some turning away, as Ethan and James stood together, unyielding. The sun was setting behind the church, casting a warm glow over the scene. Ethan felt weak, his body reminding him of its limits. But his spirit soared. He'd taken back his story, his truth. And though he didn't know it yet, this moment would ripple far beyond Willow Creek, touching hearts he'd never meet. The aftermath of Ethan's speech was chaos wrapped in silence. The crowd dispersed unevenly, some lingering to whisper, others hurrying away as if Ethan's words might cling to them. He leaned against James, his energy spent, but his eyes burned with a fire that refused to fade. Back at their small apartment, Ethan collapsed onto the couch, his breath shallow. James knelt beside him, brushing a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "You were incredible," James murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never been prouder." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Worth it?" he asked, half joking. James's eyes glistened. "Every second." But the town wasn't done with them. By morning, Willow Creek was buzzing. Ethan's stunt at the church had spread like wildfire, fueled by a grainy video someone had posted online. The clip showed Ethan, frail but fierce, declaring his love for James in front of a stunned congregation. Comments poured in, some hateful, calling him an abomination. But others, so many others, calling him brave, a hero. Ethan didn't see it. He was too weak to check his phone. James, however, read every word, his heart swelling and breaking at once. Ellen and Richard didn't call, but their presence loomed. Ethan knew they'd be plotting their next move, determined to reclaim control. He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, a letter arrived, hand-delivered by a nervous neighbor. It was from his parents, formal and cold, demanding he cease this public spectacle and return to the family's values. Ethan laughed, a hollow sound, and tossed the letter aside. "They still think they own me," he said to James, who sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting Ethan's medications. "They never did," James replied, his voice steady. "And they never will." He reached for Ethan's hand, their fingers intertwining. It was a small gesture, but it grounded Ethan, reminding him why he'd fought so hard. They'd been together for 5 years. Through college, through Ethan's diagnosis, through every door slammed in their faces. James had stayed when Ethan's health crumbled, when the chemo failed, when hope felt like a cruel joke. Ethan wanted to give him something back, a legacy, not just a memory. That night, Ethan had a new idea. "I want to write it all down," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything. Our story. So no one can twist it." James hesitated, knowing how much energy it would take. but he saw the determination in Ethan's eyes. "Okay," he said. "We'll do it together." They began the next day, Ethan dictating while James typed. Ethan's words poured out, raw and unfiltered memories of sneaking kisses in the college library, of long drives through the Indiana countryside, of the night Ethan told his parents he was gay and watched their faces harden. He wrote about the diagnosis, the way it sharpened every moment with James, making each touch, each laugh, a treasure. He wrote about the church, about standing up to a town that wanted to erase him. As they worked, Ethan's health worsened. His skin grew paler, his breath shorter. James hid his fear, focusing on the project. But every cough, every wince, cut him deeply. They took breaks in Willow Park, where they'd first fallen in love. One afternoon, under the same oak where Ethan had proposed, they sat in silence, watching the leaves fall. "I'm not scared," Ethan said suddenly. "Not anymore. Because of you." James couldn't speak. He just held Ethan tighter, memorizing the weight of him. The manuscript grew, a testament to their love and defiance. But the town wasn't finished with them. Reverend Holt organized a prayer vigil outside their apartment, a thinly veiled protest. A dozen people stood on the sidewalk, holding candles and singing hymns, their faces a mix of pity and condemnation. Ethan watched from the window, his jaw tight. "They think they're saving me," he said bitterly. James pulled him away, closing the curtains. "They don't get to decide what salvation looks like." The vigil wasn't the worst of it. Ethan's parents filed a legal motion, claiming he was mentally unfit to make decisions about his estate or legacy. They wanted control of his medical decisions, his finances, his story. James was furious, pacing the apartment. But Ethan remained calm. "They can't touch us," he said. "Not where it matters." He was right. But the fight took its toll. Ethan's energy waned, and hospital visits became more frequent. Yet he refused to stop writing. "This is bigger than us now," he told James. "It's for everyone who's been told they don't belong." James nodded, typing through tears as Ethan's voice grew weaker. By the end of the month, the manuscript was nearly complete. Ethan titled it Unbear It, a nod to his reclaimed funeral. He wanted it published, shared with the world, but he knew he might not live to see it. "Promise me," he said one night, his hand cold in James's. "Promise you'll get it out there." James swallowed hard. "I promise." The video from the church had gone viral, shared by activists and allies across the country. Ethan's story was no longer just Willow Creek's. It was a beacon for those fighting their own battles. Messages flooded in from kids in small towns, from parents who'd lost their children to rejection, from couples who saw themselves in Ethan and James. Ethan read as many as he could, his eyes bright with purpose. But time was slipping away. One night, as James read him a draft of Unbear It, Ethan's breathing grew ragged. James called an ambulance, his hands shaking. At the hospital, Ethan gripped his hand. "Don't let them win," he whispered. James nodded, unable to speak, as the machines beeped around them. The hospital room was sterile, but Ethan's presence filled it with warmth. He lay in the bed, his face gaunt, but his eyes alive with determination. James sat beside him, holding his hand, the manuscript of Unbear It open on his laptop. They were racing against time, and they both knew it. Ethan's parents escalated their efforts. Ellen and Richard visited the hospital, their faces tight with righteous anger. "We're your family, Ethan," Ellen said. Her voice clipped. "We're trying to protect you." Ethan laughed weakly, a sound that cut through the tension. "Protect me? You're trying to erase me." Richard stepped forward, his voice low. "You're confused, son. This lifestyle isn't you. We can still fix this." Ethan's eyes flashed. "The only thing that needs fixing is your heart, Dad." James squeezed his hand, proud but terrified. The confrontation ended with Ellen storming out, Richard trailing behind, their silence louder than words. The legal battle intensified. Ethan's parents hired a lawyer, claiming Ethan's delusions made him unfit to make decisions. They wanted to control his estate, his medical care, even his funeral again. James fought back, hiring a pro bono lawyer from an LGBT advocacy group. The lawyer, a fierce woman named Sarah, was a godsend. They don't have a case, she told James. Ethan's sound of mind, and we'll prove it. But Ethan's body was failing. He could barely sit up now, his words coming in gasps. Yet he insisted on finishing "Unbear It." "It's my voice," he told James. "They can't take that." James typed as Ethan spoke, his stories growing more vivid, more urgent. He wrote about the first time he felt free, dancing with James at a college bar, the world fading away. He wrote about the pain of his parents' rejection, the way it carved holes in his heart. And he wrote about hope, about the kids who'd read his story and know they weren't alone. The viral video brought more attention. A local news station picked up the story, framing Ethan as a dying man fighting for love. The segment aired nationally, and suddenly, Ethan and James were inundated with support. Letters arrived at the hospital, handwritten notes from strangers, thanking Ethan for his courage. One, from a teenager in Ohio. "Read. You made me believe I can be myself." Ethan cried reading it, his hands shaking. But not everyone was kind. Hate mail came too. Venomous letters calling Ethan a sinner, a disgrace. James shielded him from most of it, but Ethan insisted on seeing everything. "I need to know what we're up against," he said. The hate only fueled him, made his words sharper, his resolve stronger. Sarah, the lawyer, worked tirelessly. She filed motions to block Ethan's parents' claims, arguing that their actions were rooted in prejudice, not concern. In court, she presented Ethan's manuscript, his video, his letters from supporters. "This is a man who knows exactly who he is," she said. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened intently. Ethan couldn't attend, but James relayed every detail, sitting by his bedside. One night, Ethan had a vision. He was too weak to write, so he whispered it to James. "I want a message," he said. "Something for the world. After I'm gone." James nodded, his throat tight. Ethan's idea was simple but profound, a letter, to be read at his real funeral, whenever that might be. A letter that would speak to everyone, those who loved him, those who hated him, and those who didn't know him but needed his story. They worked on the letter between hospital visits and court hearings. Ethan's voice was fading, but his words were clear. "I want them to know love is enough," he said, "that it's worth fighting for." James typed, his fingers trembling, as Ethan poured his heart into every line. The letter was a call to action, a plea for acceptance, a celebration of love in all its forms. The court ruled in Ethan's favor. His parents' motion was denied. He retained control of his life, his story, his death. Sarah called with the news, and James wept, holding Ethan's hand. "We did it," he whispered. Ethan smiled, his eyes heavy. "No, we did it," he said. But victory came at a cost. Ethan's condition worsened, and the doctors gave him weeks, maybe days. James refused to leave his side, sleeping in the hospital chair, reading "Unbear It" aloud when Ethan was too tired to speak. The manuscript was nearly done, a raw, beautiful testament to their love. Ethan wanted it published, but he knew he might not see it in print. The world was watching now. The video had spread to international outlets, and Ethan's story became a symbol of resistance. Activists rallied behind him, organizing vigils not to mourn, but to celebrate. In Willow Creek, the mood was mixed. Some neighbors left flowers at their apartment. Others whispered about sin and shame. Ethan didn't care. He'd said what he needed to say. One evening, As the sun set outside the hospital window, Ethan reached for James. "Read me the letter," he said. James opened the laptop, his voice breaking as he read Ethan's words. The letter was perfect, heartbreaking, hopeful, human. Ethan smiled, his eyes closing. "That's it," he whispered. "That's what I want them to hear." Ethan's final days were a blur of love and pain. The hospital room became their sanctuary, filled with quiet moments and whispered promises. James stayed by his side, reading unburied, adjusting Ethan's pillows, holding his hand through the long nights. The world outside buzzed with their story, but in that room, it was just them, two souls bound by a love that refused to break. Ethan's parents didn't return. The court's ruling had silenced them, at least for now, but James knew they'd never accept him. It didn't matter. Ethan had made his choice, and James honored it every second. He contacted a small press, sharing unburied with an editor who'd seen Ethan's story on the news. The editor was moved to tears, promising to rush the book to print. "This needs to be out there," she said. James didn't tell Ethan. He wanted it to be a surprise, if time allowed. The letters kept coming. A nurse brought them in stacks, reading them aloud when James's voice gave out. One was from a father in Texas, apologizing for rejecting his own son. "You showed me what I've lost," he wrote. Ethan listened, his eyes bright with tears. "It's working," he whispered. "It's actually working." But his body was giving up. The leukemia had spread, and the doctors could only manage his pain. Ethan refused heavy sedation, wanting to stay clear for James, for the letter, for the world. "I'm not done yet," he'd say, a spark of defiance in his voice. James marveled at his strength, even as he watched him fade. The letter was finished, a single page that held Ethan's heart. It was addressed to everyone, a universal call for love and understanding. James kept it safe, knowing it would be his final act for Ethan. They planned a new funeral, not the one his parents wanted, but one Ethan designed. It would be in Willow Park, under the oak tree, with lilies and music and truth. James would read the letter there, when the time came. The viral video brought more than attention. It brought people. Strangers began visiting Willow Creek, leaving notes and flowers at the park. A local artist painted a mural on the town's library wall, a silhouette of two men holding hands, with Ethan's words carved below, "Love is enough." The town council tried to have it removed, but the community pushed back, signing petitions, holding rallies. Ethan's story was changing Willow Creek, whether it wanted to or not. One night, Ethan woke with a start, his eyes wide. "James," he whispered. "I saw it. The funeral. It's beautiful." James leaned close, his heart breaking. "Tell me," he said. Ethan described to hundreds of people, candles flickering, the oak tree glowing under moonlight. "And you," he said, touching James's face. "You're there, reading my letter?" James nodded, tears falling. "I'll make it happen," he promised. The next day, Ethan slipped into a coma. James didn't leave his side, holding his hand, whispering stories of their life together. The hospital staff, moved by their love, gave them privacy, bending rules to let James stay. Sarah, the lawyer, visited, bringing news that Unburied was in production. "He's going to live forever," she said, her voice soft. James could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. Ethan passed quietly on a Tuesday morning, his hand in James's, the sunrise painting the room gold. James sat there for hours, unable to move, the weight of loss crushing him. But he had a promise to keep. He clutched the letter, Ethan's final gift to the world, and began to plan. The funeral was exactly as Ethan had envisioned. Willow Park was transformed, filled with lilies, soft music, and hundreds of people, locals, strangers, activists, all drawn by Ethan's story. The oak tree stood tall, its branches heavy with autumn leaves. James stood before the crowd, Ethan's letter in his hands, his voice steady despite the grief. He began to read. To everyone, he said, his words carrying across the park. I lived a life I was told was wrong, but I loved with every piece of my heart. I loved James, and that love was my truth, my strength, my reason to fight. The crowd was silent, some weeping, others holding hands. James's voice broke as he continued. Don't let anyone tell you who to love or how to live. Be brave. Be you. That's enough. The letter ended with a simple plea. Carry love forward. For me. For you. For everyone. James looked up, tears streaming down his face, and saw the crowd, old, young, straight, queer, all united in that moment. They lit candles, their flames flickering like stars, and sang Hallelujah, Ethan's song. The funeral marked a turning point, not just for James, but for the world. Ethan's letter, read under the oak tree, spread faster than the video ever had. News outlets replayed James's reading, the words resonating across continents. Social media exploded with unburied, people sharing their own stories of love and struggle. Ethan's message simple, raw, universal became a movement. James was overwhelmed. He'd kept his promise, but the loss of Ethan was a wound that wouldn't heal. He moved through the days and a days, organizing the publication of Unburied, answering messages from strangers who felt like family. The book hit shelves 2 months later. Its cover a photo of Ethan and James under the oak tree, smiling, alive. It sold out in days. Readers drawn to Ethan's unflinching honesty, his love for James, his refusal to be erased. Willow Creek changed, slowly but surely. The mural on the library stayed, a landmark for visitors. The town council, under pressure, issued a statement supporting inclusivity, though some grumbled it was too little. Too late. Reverend Holt retired, his influence waning. A few locals, including a former classmate of Ethan's, started a support group for queer youth, naming it after him. James attended the first meeting, his heart swelling at the sight of kids who wouldn't have to hide like Ethan did. Ethan's parents remained silent. James heard through a neighbor that they'd moved to a nearby town, unable to face the community's shift. He felt no anger, only pity. They'd lost their son long before he died, and now they'd lost their place in a world that was learning to love better. James kept Ethan's memory alive. He spoke at events, sharing their story, reading from Unburied, always ending with the letter. Each time, he saw Ethan in the faces of the audience, kids finding courage, parents rethinking their choices, strangers inspired to live authentically. The letter was translated into dozens of languages, read at pride events, quoted in sermons, carved into memorials. It was Ethan's voice, eternal. 1 year after the funeral, James returned to Willow Park. The oak tree was the same, its branches heavy with new leaves. He sat on the bench, the one from their romantic moment, now etched with Ethan's words, "Love is enough." He traced the carving with his fingers, tears falling, but a smile breaking through. "You did it, Ethan," he whispered. "You changed the world." The legacy wasn't just in the book or the letter. It was in the lives touched, the hearts opened, the silences broken. Ethan had taken back his funeral, his story, his truth, and in doing so, he'd given countless others the courage to do the same. James carried him forward, every day, knowing that their love was enough.